I want to start today with a pretty staggering reality check for you regarding the 2026 economy.
Oh, yeah. It's a big one.
Right. So picture the scenario. You're a highly skilled technology professional, and you're living in one of the affluent, high-tech Dallas suburbs, let's say Frisco, Texas.
Great area. Very competitive right now.
Super competitive.
Yeah.
So you've got a solid job at a great firm, and you consider yourself, by all traditional metrics, to be securely middle class.
Sure.
But according to the latest 2026 economic data, the goalposts haven't just moved. They've basically been put on a rocket.
That is the perfect way to phrase it, honestly.
Because to actually be considered securely middle class in a hyper-concentrated tech hub like Frisco right now, a household might need to pull in up to $290,000 a year.
Yeah. It's a breathtaking number.
It really is.
When you look at the raw data on paper, it forces a complete recalibration of how we understand regional economics.
Yeah.
I mean, we used to think a six-figure salary was the ultimate finish line.
Oh, absolutely. The dream.
Right. But now, in these specific microeconomies, it's essentially the starting blocks.
Which brings us to the immediate burning question of this entire deep dive. Welcome, by the way, to episode 19.2026. This is the Graduation ROI Longitudinal Salary Realities for CIS and MIS Master's Graduates.
Glad to be here for this one. It's so critical.
Before we jump in, just a quick recap. Last week was episode 18.2026, the first 90 days, transitioning from student to senior tech leader. If you haven't heard that deep dive yet, definitely go back and check it out.
Yeah, that was a fantastic foundation for what we're going to talk about today.
For sure. And hey, if you are getting value out of these deep dives, please take a second to like, subscribe, and share. It really helps us out, and it ensures you stay on the cutting edge of all this career data.
And, I always tell my students, and you too, the listener, to check out my YouTube channel. I post a lot of course materials, videos, and other deep dives there. It's all about staying engaged and taking ownership of your career path.
Definitely do that. Okay, so back to the burning question. If you are a tech professional, maybe you just graduated, or maybe you have like a few years under your belt, you are likely looking at an entry-level bachelor's salary of around $76,000.
Which is a solid start, objectively.
Yeah, it is. But how on earth do you bridge the gap between that $76K entry point and the $190,000 to $290,000 executive tier required to actually thrive? Like, to buy a house and raise a family in these environments?
Well, I can tell you from my years as a department head and associate dean, you don't bridge that gap by just, writing better code or working longer hours.
Right. It's not just about grinding harder.
Exactly. You bridge it by fundamentally shifting how you interact with the business itself. And that's what today's source document really drills into. The core thesis is that the organizations driving this economy, they no longer place their highest premium on the people who fix the technology.
Okay, so who gets the premium?
They place it on the people who direct the technology to reshape the entire business model.
Wow. Okay, so we are going to tear into the actual salary numbers, this geographic boom happening down in Texas, and some incredible case studies, including a pretty catastrophic data loss in Dallas.
Oh, that case study is a masterclass in what not to do.
I can't wait to get into it. But the source material does something really interesting right out of the gate. Before it even touches a single dollar sign, it forces us to look at the academic taxonomy of enterprise management.
Right. The definitions.
Yeah. It starts with dictionary definitions. And honestly, my first reaction was, why are we doing a vocabulary lesson when we're supposed to be talking about a $200,000 salary?
I get that pushback from students all the time. But the truth is, the vocabulary is the barrier to entry.
How so?
Well, in the tech sector on a day-to-day basis, we throw around words like management and governance interchangeably all day long. A team lead will say, I'm managing the server migration, so I'm governing our cloud strategy.
Right, they just mash the concepts together.
Exactly. But academically, and far more importantly, when you step into the boardroom, conflating those two concepts is a massive organizational friction point. If you want executive compensation, you have to speak the executive language.
That makes total sense.
And the academic literature draws a massive, thick red line between IT governance and IT management.
Okay, let's draw that line right now. Break down that demarcation for us.
Sure. Let's start with IT governance. This is not a mid-level function. This is a critical subset of overall enterprise governance, and it's spearheaded directly by the board of directors and the highest tier of executive leadership.
So we're talking C-suite only here.
Yes, governance dictates the acceptable risk parameters for the entire company. It establishes business alignment, it determines the long-term strategic direction, and it ensures absolute regulatory compliance.
Okay.
But here is the crucial part. It does all of this without ever involving itself in the minutiae of daily operations.
So it's strictly high level. They're looking at the horizon, not the dashboard.
Precisely. IT management, conversely, functions subordinately to that governance. Management is the tactical execution of the strategic direction.
Okay, so they're the ones actually doing the thing.
Right. It involves the planning, designing, building, running, and monitoring of specific IT activities on a day-to-day basis. Management is entirely focused on operational efficiency, resource utilization, and frankly, hitting deadlines.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to see if I'm tracking this correctly.
Go for it.
Governance feels like the architects and the city planners. They are writing the building codes. They're deciding where the structural load-bearing walls need to go so the skyscraper doesn't collapse during an earthquake.
Yes, exactly.
And they are making sure the whole multi-million-dollar project aligns with the city's zoning laws. Management, on the other hand, consists of the contractors, the foremen, and the engineers on the ground.
The ones in the hard hats.
Right. They are the ones actually pouring the concrete, running the high-voltage electrical wire, and making sure the architect's blueprints become a physical reality by, Friday afternoon.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. Governance establishes the boundaries, the vision, and the safety parameters. Management executes within those boundaries to deliver the physical product.
But I'm going to push back on this a little bit, especially thinking about the current tech landscape.
Okay, let's hear it.
In the real world, especially if you look at leaner companies, aggressive startups, or even just agile teams within a bigger enterprise, we really celebrate that full stack mentality.
Oh, absolutely. Wearing multiple hats.
Exactly. So why can't a great manager just do both? I mean, if I'm leading a highly competent DevOps team, why can't the person pouring the concrete also write the building code? It just seems faster.
It absolutely seems faster. And that illusion of speed is exactly why companies do it, right up until they experience a catastrophic failure.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yes. The source document addresses your pushback directly through a vital concept called segregation of duty. The text states explicitly that a single team or a single individual cannot objectively execute management tasks while governing their own compliance.
I understand the theory, but what does that look like in practice? Why does the objectivity actually fail?
It fails because of the inherent, unavoidable conflict of interest. Imagine you are the IT manager. Your primary mandate, the thing your annual bonus is tied to, is operational speed.
Okay, yeah, get it done.
Right. You have been told to get the new software feature shipped to the customers by Friday at midnight. You are psychologically and structurally incentivized to hit that deadline. Now, what happens if it's Thursday afternoon and you discover a minor security vulnerability in the code?
Oh, I see where this is going.
If you are also the person in charge of governing the risk, the temptation is overwhelming to simply lower the risk threshold. You'll tell yourself, oh, it's an edge case. No one will exploit it. We'll just patch it next week.
Because you just want to go home on Friday.
Exactly. You bypass the security protocol to make your management job easier.
You essentially grade your own homework.
Exactly. Segregation of duty ensures that the people setting the safety standards and defining the acceptable risk are completely insulated from the pressure to cut corners. The person saying, this must be secure, cannot be the same person sweating over a Friday midnight deadline.
That makes total sense.
When an organization lacks this segregation, it opens itself up to systemic existential risk.
You really need that tension in the system. The manager is pushing the gas pedal to get to market, and the governance board is holding the steering wheel and the brakes so the car doesn't, fly off a cliff.
That's a great way to look at it.
And I know we have a case study coming up later about the city of Dallas that perfectly illustrates what happens when those brakes are missing.
We certainly do.
But before we get to the disasters, the document moves from governance into something called the Information Systems Strategy Triangle. What is that, and why does an MS-IS graduate need to master it?
So in the academic literature, Information Systems Strategy, or IS strategy, is the overarching master plan an organization uses to align its technological capabilities with its business goals.
Okay.
The strategy triangle is a framework that posits a fundamental rule. Business strategy must invariably drive both the organizational strategy and the IS strategy.
Okay, so the CEO decides what the business is going to do. Like, we are going to sell more shoes. And then the IT department figures out what servers and software they need to support selling those shoes. The business goal comes first.
Traditionally, yes, that is the baseline understanding.
Yeah.
But the briefing highlights where the real executive value lies. A mature IS strategy possesses a reciprocal relationship with the business strategy,
Reciprocal, meaning what exactly?
meaning the technology doesn't just act as a subordinate support system. It can fundamentally alter the business model itself.
Oh, I like that. But what does that actually look like when a company flips the script? How does the tech dictate the business?
Think about the macro shift from the economics of physical goods to the economics of digital information. The classic, universally understood example is the shift in home entertainment.
Like DVDs to streaming.
Exactly. If you look at a company that used to rent physical DVDs by mailing them out, their original business strategy dictated an IP strategy that was entirely focused on inventory tracking, postal logistics, and warehouse management software. The IT supported the physical mail.
Right, the tech was just a really advanced ledger.
But as their IT strategy matured, the leaders in that division recognized the exploding capabilities of streaming infrastructure, massive cloud computing clusters, and algorithmic data processing. The IS strategy pushed back on the business strategy.
They realized they could do something totally new.
Yes, the technologists went to the board and said, look, our infrastructure is now capable of delivering the product instantly over the internet. The technology enabled an entirely new competitive advantage. It transformed them from a physical logistics company into a global digital media and production empire. The technology didn't just support the business. It became the business.
Okay, so an effective IS strategy bridges the gap between raw technological capability and quantifiable business value. It takes a lot of vision to see that.
It absolutely does.
The text mentions that this requires managers to be knowledgeable participants in IT decisions rather than just spectators waiting for orders, which I think brings us to a massive friction point.
Oh, the ROI discussion.
Exactly. We all know standard corporate ROI. We've all had to justify a budget at some point. But this briefing introduces something called SSROI. Why do we need a new acronym for return on investment?
Because traditional corporate ROI is wholly inadequate for measuring systemic, enterprise-wide technological shifts.
Really? How so?
Traditional ROI is essentially a basic arithmetic equation.
Right.
You take your net profit, divide it by the initial cost, multiply by 100, and you get a percentage.
Right.
So I bought an automated software tool for $10,000. It saved my team $15,000 in manual labor hours. My ROI is positive.
It's clean. It's easy for an accountant to understand.
It is easy, and it is also dangerously narrow. SSROI, or System Strategy Return on Investment, moves beyond evaluating isolated tactical deployments. SSROI evaluates holistic, systemic needs.
Okay, so it looks at the bigger picture.
Much bigger. It forces the executive to ask, what combination of hardware resources, structural workflow changes, and human capital investments will solve our fundamental enterprise bottlenecks?
Let me see if I can ground this. Traditional ROI is me asking, is buying a new on-premise server cheaper than fixing the old broken one in the closet? It's a localized, tactical money question.
Exactly.
SSROI is me asking, if we abandon the closet entirely, move the entire infrastructure to a cloud provider, and train our staff on cloud architecture, does that allow the company to securely enter an entirely new international market next year?
That is a brilliant distillation. Traditional ROI looks at the cost of the tool. SSROI looks at the strategic capability unlocked by the system.
That's a huge difference.
It is. And making that shift from tactical to strategic requires a rigorous 5-step approach outlined in the text. You have to identify the core systemic need, consider a broad range of technological and structural options, define the specific ROI metrics that matter to the board, weigh those options against risk, and finally, make data-backed decisions based on comparative evidence of impact.
So you weren't just buying whatever software vendor took you out to the nicest steak dinner.
Exactly. You are architecting an enterprise system.
Which is exactly why companies are willing to pay astronomical salaries for people who can think this way. We've established the lexicon. If you want to move up the ladder, you have to stop speaking the language of management and operational execution, and you have to start speaking the language of leadership, governance, strategic reciprocity, and SSROI.
Spot on.
Now, I want to pivot hard into the tangible financial realities. The document provides a wealth of 2026 market data, and the numbers we are looking at are, frankly, staggering.
They really are. We are observing an economic landscape for Master of Science in Information Systems, or MS-IS and Computer Information Systems graduates, that is being heavily influenced by two things: massive macroeconomic trends and localized industry agglomeration.
Okay, let's start with the national baseline before we zoom into the crazy microeconomies. The briefing references the winter 2026 salary survey from NIST, the National Association of Colleges and Employers. They are projecting unprecedented starting salaries.
Unprecedented is the right word.
Computer sciences and information systems disciplines are maintaining absolute dominance as the highest paid major categories in all of higher education.
The sheer volume of the increase is what really caught my attention. The overall average starting salary for computer sciences graduates is projected to reach $81,535.
Wow. Straight out of undergrad.
Yes, that represents a massive 6.9% year-over-year increase. To contextualize how aggressive that is, previous typical cycles only anticipated a 2% or maybe 3% increase.
That's a massive jump.
They are massively outpacing math and sciences, which are sitting around 74,000, and they are absolutely dwarfing traditional business disciplines, which are averaging around 68,000.
And the briefing notes something fascinating about employer intent here. At least 60% of surveyed employers have explicit finalized plans to hire CS and IS majors from the class of 2026.
Right, the demand is baked in.
Exactly. That indicates a highly inelastic demand curve. Even with all the talk in the media about AI replacing coders or broader macroeconomic cooling, these companies have to hire these roles.
They don't have a choice.
But here is the friction point. That $81,000 starting salary sounds amazing to a 22-year-old. But there is an operational ceiling for bachelor's degree holders, isn't there? You don't just ride that wave to the boardroom automatically.
No, you do not. And this is the harsh reality that many mid-career tech professionals eventually face. A bachelor's degree in information systems gets your foot in the door. It hits a median entry-level salary ceiling around $65,000 to $76,000, and it typically peaks at a career median of around $90,000.
So $90,000 is kind of the wall.
Yes. That $90,000 represents the tactical management level ceiling we discussed earlier. You are the foreman pouring the concrete. You are highly skilled. You are necessary, but your value to the company has a cap because you are executing strategy, not creating it.
Which brings us to what the document calls the MS-IS multiplier. This is where the advanced credential completely rewrites the math.
The Master of Science in Information Systems is the catalyst that breaks that operational ceiling. When you acquire this advanced credential, and more importantly, the strategic frameworks that come with it, you shift into an entirely different economic echelon.
Give us the numbers.
Baselines jump from that 76K mark to over 110,000 almost immediately. And more importantly, the long-term executive trajectory frequently reaches the $170,000 to $190,000 range for top management and governance roles.
The data explicitly shows that graduates with 3 to 5 years of experience who hold an MS-IS typically earn 20 to 40% more than their peers who only hold a bachelor's degree.
It's a massive premium.
But I want to talk about the cost of getting that degree. Because grad school isn't cheap. We all know about the student debt crisis.
Oh, certainly, it's a real concern for students.
The text introduces a sub-metric of educational ROI called the price-to-earnings premium, or P. How does the PP factor into this decision?
The PEP is foundational when evaluating if a degree is actually worth the debt. It mathematically quantifies the number of years it takes an average student to recoup their educational investment.
Okay, how do you calculate it?
You calculate it by dividing the total net price of the degree, so tuition fees, lost opportunity cost, by the difference between the median earnings of the degree holder and the median earnings of someone with just an undergraduate degree.
So it's basically the break-even point.
Exactly. A long PE is a massive warning sign. If you see a degree with a 15-year PP, it often points to predatory for-profit institutions where the exorbitant debt heavily outweighs the marginal earnings bump.
Right. You're just drowning in debt for a tiny raise.
But because the salary jump provided by an MS-IS is so drastic, leaping from 90K up to 170K, the PEP for a high-quality program is incredibly short. The student recoups their capital investment very rapidly. It is one of the most efficient educational investments available in the modern economy.
But the briefing makes it clear that this isn't just about what degree you hold, it's about where you hold it. Location acts as the ultimate geographic accelerant.
Absolutely. Geography is destiny in this field.
And this is where the document zeroes in on Texas, and specifically the Dallas-Fort Worth, or DFW, region. According to the 2026 North American Tech Hub Index, DFW has just surpassed Washington, D.C., San Francisco, and New York as the #1 tech hub in North America.
It's a tectonic shift in the industry landscape.
Yeah.
And that #1 ranking isn't just, a subjective survey of where people like to live.
Yeah, it's hard data.
It is generated by cross-referencing highly granular physical tech infrastructure data. We are talking about the concentration of internet exchanges, massive deployments of dark fiber networks, and inland subsea cable routing. They cross-reference that with tech talent migration metrics and massive corporate facility projects.
The financial sector is literally calling the region Y'all Street because of this massive, unprecedented boom in financial technology, logistics, and corporate operations.
Y'all Street, I love that.
Right. Not to mention the highly anticipated 2026 launch of the Texas Stock Exchange, the TXSE, right in downtown Dallas, operating alongside a brand new regional headquarters for NASDAQ.
The density of capital is staggering. You have an agglomeration of 54 Fortune 500 headquarters operating in Texas. When you pack that many massive, complex organizations into a single geographic footprint, they all end up competing for the same finite pool of executive tech talent.
And that drives salaries through the roof.
Exactly. That competition creates staggering regional wage premiums. As of May 2026, the average annual pay for an MS-IS professional in Texas overall is $98,554. But Dallas drastically outperforms the state average. Dallas MS-IS professionals average $104,645.
So just by moving your desk to Dallas, you get a 6.2% premium over the state baseline.
Yes, and that's just the average. The 75th percentile of MS-IS earners in Dallas commands over $120,000, while top earners in the 90th percentile reach upwards of $129,000 annually.
That is wild.
Furthermore, if you combine the MS-IS governance knowledge with hyper-specialized technical roles, the numbers climb even higher. A Cognos architect, which involves deep systemic enterprise architecture knowledge, is looking at average annual salaries of $151,859. Synapse product developers are pulling $118,000.
Okay, this brings us right back to the hook I opened the deep dive with, the Smart Asset 2026 study. What it takes to be middle class in America.
The reality check.
Yeah. While these salaries of $129,000 and $151,000 sound incredibly high, the regional economic pressures in North Texas are intense. We aren't talking about living in a mansion here. We are talking about basic middle class stability.
The inflation of the housing market and the cost of living in these hyper-concentrated hubs has vastly outpaced national averages. The study indicates that just maintaining a middle-class status in Fort Worth requires a household income up to $165,000.
And as we mentioned, in the ultra-competitive DFW tech suburbs, it skyrockets. Frisco requires almost $97,000 just to barely enter the middle class and up to $290,000 to stay at the top of it. Plano requires between $77,000 and $231,000.
It's sobering.
So I have to ask you this point blank. Especially with your background advising students, a lot of people view a master's degree as a nice to have, a resume booster, or, an academic vanity project. Looking at this specific math, is the MS-IS degree a luxury, or is it literally a regional survival requirement for the suburban tech worker who wants to buy a home?
If we divorce ourselves from the romance of education and look purely at the cold economic data, it leans heavily toward a survival requirement for sustaining a high quality of life in these specific corporate hubs.
Wow.
An undergraduate operational salary capping out at $76,000 to $90,000 is simply insufficient to comfortably sustain a family, pay a mortgage, and save for retirement in a region where the upper bound of the middle-class threshold pushes past $200,000.
It's just simple math at that point.
Right. Without the upward mobility, the strategic elasticities, and the executive trajectory provided by the advanced degree, you are financially stagnant in a hyperinflationary microeconomy. You will literally be priced out of the very cities you are helping to build.
That is a stark, unavoidable reality. So the financial data unequivocally proves why an MS-IS is valuable. It is the key to escaping the 90K trap and entering that 170K governance tier.
Exactly.
But how do these graduates actually earn those salaries? I mean, if I'm a CEO paying someone that much money, what do they know that the bachelor's degree holder doesn't? Let's dive into the secret weapons of the MS-IS graduate. maturity models, and enterprise frameworks.
This is the exact point where we bridge academic theory and corporate practice. The transition from being a highly effective mid-level IT contributor to becoming a strategic enterprise leader requires fluency in globally recognized frameworks.
And what happens if they don't have that fluency?
Without these methodologies, large organizations inevitably fall victim to a phenomenon the academic literature calls situational incompetence.
Situational incompetence. That is such a loaded, fascinating phrase.
It really is.
The document defines it as a room full of brilliant individual contributors, like genius-level coders, savant network engineers, or brilliant data scientists who collectively fail because they lack systemic coordination. How does a room full of geniuses fail?
It is a profound organizational concept.
Yeah.
You can hire the absolute smartest software engineers on the planet. You can put them in a room with unlimited coffee and top-tier hardware. But if they spend 6 months building a flawless, incredibly fast application that the business ultimately doesn't need to sell, their brilliance is functionally useless.
Ah, right. It doesn't align with the business strategy.
Or worse, if they deploy code that is incredibly innovative but inadvertently violates a massive international regulatory compliance like GDPR, their brilliance actively damages the company. It is situationally incompetent. Frameworks exist to prevent this isolation of brilliance.
Let's walk through the heavy hitters mentioned in the briefing, because this is the toolkit the MS-IS graduate brings to the boardroom. The first one is ITIL 4, the Information Technology Infrastructure Library. Now, I know older IT folks remember ITIL version 3 as being incredibly rigid.
Oh yes, very rigid. ITIL 4 represents a massive shift in how we manage IT services. The industry recognized that the highly sequential service lifecycle of ITIL v3 was just too slow for the era of cloud computing and rapid deployment.
So they updated it.
They did. ITIL 4 shifted toward agility, deep integration with DevOps, and the holistic co-creation of value between the IT provider and the consumer. It is anchored by the 4 dimensions of service management. The goal of these dimensions is to ensure no single aspect of an organization is optimized at the expense of another.
Let's dig into these 4 dimensions. How do they actually prevent that situational incompetence we just talked about?
Well, the first dimension is organizations and people, and this goes far beyond just, an HR org chart. This focuses on corporate culture, clearly defined roles, responsibilities, and systemic capacity building.
So dealing with the human element.
Right, because if you have great tech but a toxic culture of blame, your service will fail.
Oh, for sure.
The second dimension is information and technology. This is what most people think of as IT. The actual data architecture, the software applications, the databases, and the physical infrastructure.
Right, the servers and the code. What's the third?
The third is partners and suppliers. This manages vendor relationships and third-party risk. In the modern era, where almost everything relies on massive cloud providers like AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud, your service is really only as strong as your weakest third-party vendor. You have to manage those contracts and integrations strategically.
That makes sense. You can't just ignore the vendors.
And the fourth dimension is value streams and processes. This maps exactly how the organization integrates all these disparate parts, the people, the tech, the vendors, to actually deliver a tangible service or product to the end consumer.
So instead of the database team working in a vacuum, the value stream forces them to see how their database affects the customer checking out on the website. And all of that operates within the broader service value system, the SVS, which includes guiding principles, governance, the service value chain practices, and continual improvement. It sounds like ITIL 4 is basically the operating system for modern IT management.
It really is.
Let's move to the next one, which deals with something keeping every CEO awake at night: security. We have the NIST cybersecurity framework, specifically the massive 2.0 update.
The National Institute of Standards and Technology executed a fundamental update to this framework. Historically, it was heavily focused on critical infrastructure, right? Power grids, water plants, things like that.
Really big physical targets.
Right. NIST CSF 2.0 expands the scope to encompass all organizational types, from massive enterprise tech firms all the way down to small universities and logistics companies. But the biggest change, and this directly proves the academic theory of governance we discussed earlier, is that CSF 2.0 elevates the govern function to the absolute center of the framework.
In previous versions, the core functions were identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Now, govern sits right in the middle of all of them. Why the sudden elevation?
Because the nature of cyber threats evolved. Ransomware and massive supply chain attacks ceased being just a nuisance and became existential business threats that can bankrupt a company in a weekend.
Yeah, we've seen hospitals shut down, pipelines halted.
Exactly. Govern establishes the organizational context, the risk management strategies, and the executive oversight required to fund the other functions. It explicitly mandates that supply chain risk must be monitored at the C-suite level.
So it's not just the IT guy's problem anymore.
The inclusion of govern at the center is NIST explicitly stating that cybersecurity is no longer just an IT department problem. It is a board-level strategic corporate issue. You simply cannot protect an asset, detect a breach, or respond to an incident effectively if you do not have executive governance establishing the baseline risk tolerance and providing the budget.
This circles back perfectly to why the MS-IS grad makes the big bucks. The bachelor's degree holder is implementing the protect and detect functions. They're configuring the firewalls.
Right.
The MS-IS graduate is implementing the govern function. They're defining the rules of engagement. Moving on, the text highlights the PMBOK Guide's 7th edition from the Project Management Institute.
This was another fundamental industry shift. The PMBOK moved away from prescriptive, rigid, knowledge-based processes and transitioned to principle-driven performance domains.
There are 8 of them, right?
Yes. Stakeholder, team, development approach, and life cycle, planning, project work, delivery, measurement, and uncertainty. For an MS-IS professional, these domains provide a flexible but unified system to manage incredibly complex IT deployments.
I want to focus on that last domain, uncertainty. That sounds completely counterintuitive to everything project management is supposed to be. Isn't a project manager's entire job to eliminate uncertainty?
That is the legacy mindset, and honestly, it's a dangerous one. You cannot eliminate uncertainty in a complex digital environment. If you try, you end up paralyzing the project with endless analysis.
Analysis paralysis.
Exactly. The uncertainty domain in PMBOK 7 teaches leaders how to structurally absorb risk, handle ambiguity, and build resilient systems that can adapt when the unexpected happens, rather than shattering. It's about navigating the fog, not pretending the fog doesn't exist.
I love that, navigating the fog.
Yeah.
And finally, we have what might be the most important framework in the entire document because it deals with the messiest variable of all, humans.
Oh, yes.
Dr. John Kotter's 8-step change management process. The text emphasizes a profound point. Massive technological implementations almost never fail because of flawed software. They fail due to human resistance, cultural inertia, and poor organizational alignment. Tech fails because of people.
That is the core, unvarnished truth of enterprise IT. You can spend $50 million buying the most sophisticated, mathematically perfect enterprise software globally. But if the workforce on the ground hates the interface or feels threatened by the automation and actively refuses to adopt it, your massive SSROI is effectively zero.
My analogy for this is like trying to upgrade a computer. You can buy the most expensive, state-of-the-art enterprise software in the world, but if you don't first update the human operating system using Kotter steps, the whole company will crash upon installation.
That's a fantastic analogy.
Let's really dig into these 8 steps because understanding this is the key to executive leadership.
Okay, step 1 is create a sense of urgency. You have to shatter the organizational status quo. Humans are naturally complacent. You have to highlight an impending competitive crisis or a bold, unmissable opportunity.
But how do you do that without just causing panic and employee burnout? I mean, if everything is an emergency, nothing is.
That is the art of leadership. You don't create panic. You create clarity. You show them the data that says, look, if we don't digitize our supply chain in 18 months, our competitor will outprice us by 30%. It's about establishing a compelling business reality.
Okay, step 2.
Step 2 is build a guiding coalition. You cannot mandate change alone from the CIO's office. You must assemble a volunteer network of influential, respected stakeholders from across different departments, marketing, sales, HR, to guide the change.
Then step 3 is form a strategic vision. You have to clarify exactly how the future will be different and crucially better for the employees.
Right.
Step 4 is enlist a volunteer army. You communicate the vision aggressively and get people on board voluntarily. But why a volunteer army, though? Why not just make it a mandatory HR directive?
Because forced compliance breeds malicious obedience.
Malicious obedience.
Yes. If you mandate a new software, employees will use it exactly as instructed, but they will not innovate. And the moment something goes wrong, they will happily blame the system. A volunteer army, however, takes ownership of this success.
That makes total sense. Moving to step 5.
Step 5 is enable action by removing barriers. This is critical. You have to actively dismantle legacy corporate structures, misaligned incentive programs, or obsolete tech that gets in the way of the new vision.
Right. You can't ask people to sprint while tying their shoelaces together.
Exactly.
Step 6 is generate short-term wins. This is fascinating to me. You don't wait 3 years for the final deployment. You engineer highly visible, indisputable successes early on. Why are those short-term wins so vital?
They serve two purposes. First, they prove the theoretical value of the change to the board, which secures continued funding. Second, they silence the internal critics and skeptics. Success is infectious.
Step 7 is sustain acceleration.
Yes. You don't declare victory after the first win. You push harder, leveraging that momentum to change even more entrenched systems.
And finally, step 8.
Institute change. You anchor the new behaviors deeply into the corporate culture, the hiring practices, and the promotional criteria so people don't slowly regress to their old, comfortable habits.
If an MS-IS graduate can master Kotter's psychological model of human change and combine it with the rigorous technical architectures of ITIL and NIST, they become virtually unstoppable in the corporate hierarchy. They can design the system, and they can convince the humans to actually use it.
They become true enterprise leaders.
Okay, these frameworks sound incredibly elegant. They are clean, logical, and academically rigorous. But we all know the real world is messy.
Very messy.
The moment you step out of the classroom and into the hyper-aggressive DFW market, you are going to walk into a buzzsaw of conflicting demands, tight budgets, and panicked executives. I want to look at the ideological wars currently raging in the tech sector, showing how MS-IS graduates must navigate these contrarian debates.
These points of friction are fascinating because they serve as critical evaluation metrics for how organizations structure their talent pipelines. The first major debate the document highlights is the tension between the IT skills gap and the value of academic rigor.
I'm going to play devil's advocate for the industry here.
Go for
Let's take the hardline pragmatist argument. Employers are constantly loudly complaining they can't hire people with immediate hands-on skills. The data in the briefing says nearly 70% of tech employers report significant difficulty filling IT roles because applicants lack practical day-one skills in AI deployment, big data wrangling, or specific cloud platforms like AWS and Azure.
Right.
So as a hiring manager, I have a product launch in 3 weeks. I need someone to deploy code today. Why should a prospective student spend years and tens of thousands of dollars on a theoretical master's degree when they could just get a bunch of high-level vendor certifications, build a robust, provable GitHub repository, and jump right into the workforce making money?
It is a completely valid critique from the operational management level. If you only need a ditch dug today, you hire the person holding the shovel.
Exactly.
But the academic defense counters that operational mindset with the philosophy of strategic elasticity. The pragmatist is always chasing the tool of the day. And the harsh, undeniable reality of the technology sector is that the tool of the day goes obsolete incredibly fast.
It really does. Look at frameworks from 5 years ago.
Right. If you spend all your time memorizing the exact syntax of a proprietary software language or the specific dashboard layout of a single cloud vendor, your career viability is entirely dependent on that specific software remaining dominant.
So it's a choice between short-term survival and long-term viability.
Exactly. MS-IS programs are not vocational coding boot camps. They're designed to instill systemic problem-solving capabilities. They teach foundational database architecture, complex systems thinking, IT governance, and financial SSROI modeling.
So they might not be the fastest coder on day one.
The MS-IS grad might not know the absolute newest undocumented Azure syntax upon graduation, but they understand the macro-level architecture required to hire and direct the engineers who do. The true hallmark of executive leadership is long-term strategic foresight, not transient tactical execution. Certifications prove you can operate the machine. The MS-IS proves you can design the factory.
I absolutely love that distinction. Certifications prove you can operate the machine. The MS-IS proves you can design the factory. That leads perfectly into the second major point of friction: agility and speed versus rigorous IT governance.
A classic battle.
I want to introduce this tension with something called the bandit problem, which comes from decision-making theory and machine learning. It's the constant, agonizing choice a firm faces. Do we exploit the safe, known technology that makes us reliable money right now, or do we risk failure and downtime by exploring highly innovative, uncertain, but potentially lucrative new technologies?
The modern enterprise, especially those heavily driven by DevOps, agile methodologies, and Silicon Valley culture, worships velocity. They want CI/CD pipelines, continuous integration, and continuous deployment, where developers are shipping digital products and updates to consumers instantly, multiple times a day.
Right. The agile view is that speed is practically a religion. Governance boards, change advisory meetings, rigorous compliance audits, these are all viewed with intense hostility by developers.
They see them as bureaucratic bottlenecks.
Designed by people who don't understand tech. The mantra is, fail fast, break things. If you stand still, the market will kill you. They even justify the concept of shadow IT.
Shadow IT being when a marketing department or a sales team just takes a corporate credit card and buys their own SaaS software without ever telling the IT department because the official procurement oversight is too slow.
Exactly. They view going rogue as a rational response to slow corporate bureaucracy.
But I will step in here as the voice of risk management, playing the role of the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer. Speed without rigorous governance is not innovation. It is corporate negligence.
Those are strong words. A lot of Silicon Valley founders would hate that sentence.
They might hate it, but it is entirely backed by empirical data and massive financial losses. Unchecked, ungoverned agility leads to catastrophic data breaches, undocumented supply chain vulnerabilities, and massive regulatory fines that can decimate market capitalization overnight.
Because no one is watching the shop.
Right. We mentioned earlier that academic frameworks like NIST CSF 2.0 explicitly mandate top-down oversight to prevent this exact cowboy mentality. Furthermore, the idea that governance inherently inhibits speed is a false dichotomy. Good governance provides a safe operational highway.
It's like having high-performance brakes on a sports car. The brakes don't exist to slow you down and ruin your fun. They exist so you have the confidence to drive fast, knowing you can safely handle a sharp turn.
Precisely. And if we look at the financial waste generated by unmanaged, chaotic agility, it is staggering. The data shows that roughly 20% of all IT projects are canceled entirely before completion, and less than a third finish on time and within their original budget.
Wow.
That is billions of dollars incinerated because teams wanted to run fast before they knew where they were going. Robust governance provides what we call early warning signs, or EWSs. Governance boards identify the red flags of a failing project early, terminating it before it consumes massive enterprise budgets.
So we have these massive theoretical debates. Academic versus pragmatic, speed versus governance. How do these abstract arguments actually play out in the dirt and grime of the DFW market?
Let's look at the real-world examples.
To finish out our exploration, we are going to look at 3 explosive, real-world case studies mentioned in the briefing document. We have 1 massive, highly public failure and 2 spectacular organizational successes.
Let's start with the failure, because the autopsy of a disaster often teaches us more than the celebration of a win. This illustrates the visceral danger of neglecting the frameworks we've discussed. The scenario involves the municipal government of the city of Dallas in March 2021.
This was catastrophic and made national news. The municipality experienced a massive data loss event during a seemingly routine server data migration.
Yes, a routine migration.
They lost millions of files, and the critical issue was that these are primarily law enforcement evidence files. Dashcam footage, case notes, highly sensitive data. It was a highly visible, incredibly damaging public disaster.
When the post-mortem analyses and audits were finally conducted, they revealed something terrifying. This wasn't a highly sophisticated cyber attack by a nation-state. It wasn't a freak hardware failure.
What was it then?
It was a profound, systemic breakdown in strategic resource management and governance oversight. The Information Technology Services Department was found to be operating without long-term strategic purchasing plans. They were relying on outdated architectures. Most critically, they attempted highly risky, massive data migrations without a strategic safety net, proper backups, or rigorous procedural oversight.
Let's analyze the specific disaster through the frameworks you just learned because it perfectly maps to the theory. If we look at the PMBOK guide, this was a complete failure of the planning domain and an absolute inability to handle the uncertainty domain. They didn't structurally absorb the risk of the migration failing.
Absolutely.
Through the lens of ITIL 4, it was a total collapse of the value streams and processes dimension, specifically the change management practice. You do not move millions of police files without a rigorous, governed process.
No, you don't.
And regarding NIST CSF 2.0, there was an absolute absence of the governed function.
There was no executive oversight, ensuring that technical actions taken by the management tier were governed by strict policy, risk assessment, and verifiable backups. The lesson here is stark and unforgiving. Technical actions executed without executive risk assessment lead to systemic disaster.
It's just a matter of time.
If an MS-IS leader, operating as a true strategic CIO, had been running that specific migration, they would have instituted strict architectural reviews. They would have built an early warning system to halt that migration the second a discrepancy appeared, long before millions of files were irreversibly deleted.
It proves, in the most painful way possible, that technical proficiency in moving data is completely useless without executive-level governance ensuring the data is protected.
Exactly.
Let's shift away from the disaster and look at a major win. Scenario B Toyota Connected, based in Plano, Texas.
This is a masterclass in strategic pivot. Toyota, one of the largest physical manufacturers in the world, realized they needed to transition from legacy automotive metal bending to digital mobility services. They needed to develop SaaS platforms, AI integrations, and connected car ecosystems.
But forcing a massive, heavily bureaucratic legacy manufacturing company to suddenly act like a nimble software firm is almost impossible.
It is. The cultural antibodies of the old company will attack the new digital initiatives.
So what did their chief digital officer, Zach Hicks, actually do? How do you overcome that massive inertia?
He perfectly executed John Kotter's change management model. Instead of fighting a grueling, unwinnable war against the legacy bureaucracy head-on, he created a siloed, agile incubator, Toyota Connected. He built a guiding coalition, that's Kotter's step 2, and gave him their own decision rights, their own physical space, and their own agile ways of working.
So he just removed the barriers.
Exactly. This allowed this specialized team to generate massive digital innovation by effectively bypassing the parent company's slow, traditional manufacturing governance.
They successfully blended the massive financial resources of a giant global enterprise with the velocity and culture of a lean Silicon Valley startup. It's brilliant.
It's the perfect execution of strategy.
Let's look at the final case study. Another massive counterintuitive success. BNSF Railway in Fort Worth, Texas. I genuinely marvel at this one. We are talking about trains, an analog, heavy metal, centuries-old logistics company behaving like a cutting-edge tech startup.
BNSF recognized a fundamental physical limitation. They could not simply expand their physical track capacity indefinitely to handle more freight. Real estate is finite.
You can't just build tracks everywhere.
So instead of trying to lay more steel, they launched an internal, highly specialized tech division called BNSF Tech. And crucially, they moved away from just buying off-the-shelf software from vendors. They began building proprietary, patented digital solutions.
The details of what they built are incredible. Think about how a rail yard used to work. Guys walking around with clipboards looking at numbers on the side of train cars.
Very manual, very slow.
BNSF deployed drones equipped with 3D triangulation and advanced machine vision to conduct automated yard checks. The drones fly the yard and optimize the exact location of shipping containers, turning a process that used to take an entire crew, an entire shift to manually inventory into a rapid automated data stream.
It's incredible.
And they didn't stop there. They deployed AI-driven load plan optimization. This system mathematically organizes train loadouts in seconds, ensuring the weight is distributed perfectly and saving hostler drivers, the folks moving the cars around the yard miles of unnecessary travel.
This is the ultimate perfect execution of the Information Systems Strategy Triangle and SSROI. They didn't just buy a drone because it's cool. They identified a holistic systemic bottleneck, physical yard capacity. They invested deeply in human capital and bespoke technology to solve it.
And it changed their whole business model.
In doing so, they fundamentally altered their competitive advantage. Technology became their core business differentiator, not just a back-office support function keeping the email servers running. They successfully blended the agility required by PMBOK's development approach domain with the rigorous governed information and technology dimension of ITIL 4.
Which brings us to the end of our journey today. We have covered the vocabulary of the boardroom, the staggering realities of the DFW tech boom, the frameworks that prevent disaster, and the real-world companies putting this into practice.
It's been a massive amount of material.
It really has. Let's pull all these distinct threads together and deliver the final verdict on the true ROI of the MS-IS degree. We are going to synthesize all these takeaways into what the document calls the MS-IS perspective. Give us the 3 pillars of our conclusion.
Absolutely. Pillar number 1, governance fluency is the catalyst. The financial jump from a 90K tactical ceiling to a 170K plus executive tier is not about becoming a faster coder or a better network engineer.
It's the language.
It is about speaking the boardroom language of risk, compliance, and SSROI. It is about translating raw technical data into strategic business intelligence using maturity models like ITIL 4 and NIST CSF 2.0. If you can govern the system, you hold the value.
Pillar number 2, the DFW multiplier. Location profoundly matters. The intense corporate agglomeration in North Texas, those 54 Fortune 500 headquarters fighting for talent, exponentially accelerates the price-to-earnings premium of the degree.
It makes the MS-IS an incredible value play for regional professionals.
It is the most reliable mechanism for successfully securing that incredibly high financial threshold required for middle class living in North Texas without being priced out.
And pillar number 3, strategic elasticity. Vendor tools, proprietary software languages, and trendy cloud platforms will inevitably rot. They will become obsolete, replaced by whatever is next. But the ability to architect enterprise systems, to govern massive organizational risk, and to lead complex human change through Kotter's frameworks, that skill set is immune to obsolescence. Strategic elasticity ensures that no matter how violently the technological landscape shifts in the coming decades, you can continuously align the infrastructure to advance the core business strategy.
What an incredible synthesis. Thank you so much for bringing your academic and industry expertise to this deep dive.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you, the listener, for sticking with us. Before we go, I want to encourage you to tune in next week for episode 20.2026, Designing for Excellence, How ACUE and Quality Matters Standards Impact Workforce Readiness.
It's going to be a great one.
It really is. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final lingering question to mull over as you go back to your day. Look at your current job and think about your long-term trajectory.
Let's hear it.
The specific technology you are typing on today will almost certainly be obsolete in 5 years. But the human structures that govern that technology will remain exactly the same. So ask yourself, are you spending your valuable time mastering the tool, or are you mastering the system that wields it?
That is the ultimate question. If you were genuinely motivated to take that next step and master the system, I highly encourage you to explore continuing education programs. It's a strong investment for those looking for flexibility, practical learning, and real future-focused career preparation.
Absolutely. Keep learning, keep growing. We'll see you next week.